Hey guys, it's the week after Easter. We still celebrate Easter. It's not just a one weekend thing, but we are super excited. We had a great weekend at LFBC. Super excited about what God's doing here, what God's doing in the future, in the youth group, in the church as a whole. And we're going to get back into James and continue our series called Under Pressure. So today we are in James chapter 4. James chapter 4. And we're going to finish up chapter 4, and next week we'll get into chapter 5. As you're turning over there, I want you to think about something. When you're driving your car, it's super important to stay in your lane. Some of you guys know that. Some of you guys will figure that out. And if you don't, you'll have some problems, right? It's critically important to stay in your lane. It's vital to stay in the lane that you belong in. In a similar sense, we need to remember where God has placed us. And through our speech, through our actions, stay where he's put us, not veering off into other places, not veering off into other paths. James talks about about some ways that this is true here in James chapter 4. We'll give you an illustration real fast, and then we'll dig into this. When you're running, when you're on a track, you're running, or you're in a race and you're running, you're taught not to look back. Why? Because you can lose your place, you can lose your momentum and that kind of thing. And it's the same deal in life. Quit looking at what the other runners are doing. Quit trying to get in the other lanes, get in the business of other people. So here in James chapter 4, he talks about words, he talks about actions, he talks about things like that. James chapter 4, don't criticize one another, starting in verse 11. Brothers and sisters, anyone who defames or judges a fellow believer defames and judges the law. If you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will travel to such and such city and spend a year there and do business and make profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring, what your life will be. For you are like vapor that appears for a little while, then vanishes. Instead, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil, so it is sin to know the good and yet not do it. So he starts off talking about speech, and he's already talked about speech earlier in James as a book, but he talks about it here, that worldly speech dishonors God and discourages other people. When we're under pressure, sometimes we say things that we regret. Sometimes we say things that we wouldn't have said otherwise, and we get ourselves into trouble. Our mouths can betray us. They can betray us. They can betray our faith commitment, and we need to watch the tongue. We need to watch the mouth. James is referring specifically to speech that condemns other people, speech that speaks down to other people, speaks in a hostile, deriding, defaming, degrading way, running down another person, slandering them, things like that. Mockery, judgment of another person's life, another person's value, another person's worth, ultimately, through our words. It has no place in the life of a believer who's trying to follow Christ, trying to honor Christ with their lives. We're acting in a way that betrays our commitment. We're acting in a way that says that we're better than that other person that God has made. Our mouths can betray a heart that's not right. Our mouths can be discouragement. Our mouths can kill community as we put down others, as we put ourselves above others. We're self-righteous. We tear down when we talk down to other people. So we need to avoid this worldly speech and instead seek after godly speech that exalts God and that encourages other people. This kind demonstrates a love for God, a love for neighbor. It speaks life into people. It glorifies him. It points to his truth. It encourages and speaks life into other people instead of tearing them down, instead of speaking death. Lift people up, celebrate their triumphs, encourage them in their valleys. Call things out, yes, but in a loving manner, a helpful manner, trying to point them back to Christ, back to the path. How we treat others, how we speak to others reflects our view of who God is and how important he is to us. We're not meant to play God, but we're meant to lift other people up. We're meant to lift him up through our speech. God has shown us grace and mercy, and so we need to practice it in our speech with others. So that's the first thing about our speech. Speak life into other people. Don't speak worldly speech, speak godly speech. Second thing, stay humble. Verses 13 through 16 deal with this idea. Don't boast about your life and your future is the first thing he talks about. Brandon Burlsworth was an All-American lineman for the University of Arkansas, and he had a saying, stay humble or stumble. That's the way we need to live our lives. Too often we play the comparison game. We think that we're better than others. We judge, we divide, we act like we're better. We need to understand our own weaknesses, acknowledge our own weaknesses, and live our lives not just in light of tomorrow, but in light of eternity. It's not arrogant to make plans, but it is arrogant to make plans that don't include God or that go against his plans, that don't consider his plans, that don't consider that he might change the plans ahead of us. We don't need to presume that we know what's ahead of us. Proverbs says multiple times that God knows the plans he has for us and that he charts the course for us. But we can become so consumed with the daily life, the material life, that we forget the spiritual side and we forget to include God in our plans. Plan ahead, yes, but plan in a way that includes God and includes his plans, that has God as central to your plans. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. It's in his hands, not ours. We need to factor that into our planning. We need to factor that into our view of the future. Life has too many variables and contingencies to guarantee that we even have tomorrow. So don't boast about your life and your future. Second thing, realize your life is a small blip on the radar of eternity. The Bible addresses the shortness of our lives so many different times. We're a mist, we're a vapor, we're a beep in time. Our lives are short in light of eternity, in light of the whole timeline of eternity. And it can be taken from us at any point by factors that we can't even control. We have no idea. And I've seen that so many times in people that I know over the years that have had to deal with life suddenly be taken away through tragedy, accident, cancer, whatever it might be. These people were planning to make money well into next year, not realizing that they might not even see tomorrow. They're acting and speaking as if their plans are certainties. They're acting and speaking as if they could arrogantly go about life unaware that their breath could be taken at any moment. Our lives are a mist. They're a vapor. They're here and then they're gone. They could be taken away at any time. They could be here one moment and gone the next. We only have the next breath, much less the next hour, day, month, year, by the grace of God, if he wills it. Our lives can be taken at any moment. Our lives can be gone in any instant. We are mortal. Life is short, and we have no idea what our future holds. We aren't the center of the universe. We're here, and then we're gone. Psalm 90:12 says, "Teach us to number our days that we may have a heart of wisdom." That's what we need to remember, that our lives are short in the time scale of eternity, the grand scale of eternity. The third thing here, remember God is sovereign over everything. Quit planning as if we're in control. God is in control. All we do, all we accomplish, all we attain is because of him and because of his grace and his control and his sovereignty over all things. Humility means we have a higher view of God and a lower view of ourselves, and that's the way we need to live our lives. We acknowledge that we're not him, nor were we ever meant to be him. He's Lord, he's sovereign, he's ruling. He's the one over all things, including our lives. He's controlling all things. As the old song says, as a child, he's got the whole world in his hands. We trust that he's in control and that his control is much better than what ours could ever be. At the heart of surrender is a recognition that God is in control and I am not. That's not passivism. Following Christ is active. Following God is active. But it's realizing that we submit to God. We surrender to God. We live and plan like our lives are short and we don't waste a single moment. We're not masters of our own destiny. We're not captains of our own soul. True submission to God reminds us of who we are and who we're not. The final thing James talks about here is to stay in God's will. Verse 15, verse 17. A couple of things here. First, center your life decisions around God's will. Honest submission to God means humble obedience to God. It means surrendering to God's will. It means running everything through the microscope of the will of God. Is this God's will? It's more than just some cliche slogan where everything we do we go, well, if it's God's will, if it's God's will, if it's God's will. It's literally living in light of the realization that we only get to do what we do if it's in light of God's will. Our main goal in life is not to make money and be happy and live a long life and prosper and get a bigger house and a bigger car and all that kind of stuff. It's not any of that. All of our planning should reflect the will of God over our own. It's not our agenda, it's the will of God, driven by him, driven by his control, driven by his will, aligning every decision to what matters to him above what matters to us. Make plans, yes, but submit them, surrender them to him for his approval. And then finally, know what is right and obey. We get caught up sometimes in sins of commission. I did this or he did that or whatever. But sins of omission, things that we know we're supposed to do, that God says we're supposed to do, and we blatantly disregard them, those are sin as well. When we know something God wants us to do and we don't do it, we sin. Just like when we do something we're not supposed to. It's equally serious in the eyes of God to ignore the things that he says to do, to ignore the things that we're supposed to do, as it is to do things that we're not supposed to do. So ask yourself, is God calling me to give up something? Is God calling me to let go of something? To go talk to someone about him? To accept a difficult responsibility? To share my faith with somebody? To change my career path, the trajectory of my life according to his will? To give up a relationship? To give up a future dream? To give up anything as he leads? To follow him as he leads? Our answer should always be, Lord, I am willing. Lord, here I am. Send me. Take me. I'll do it because it's your will. Ultimately, this is about getting out of the driver's seat. It's about shifting ourselves over to the passenger seat, submitting to God, surrendering to Him, letting Him take control as He was always meant to be. Stay in your lane. Allow Him to be God. Don't get sidewise by the things of the world or by what other people are doing. Lean on Him, surrender to Him, submit to His will.